Greetings and Talapalava. We welcome you to another session of Talanoa. We'd like to thank you for allowing us to enter into your home through this virtual feed.
As many of you know, Talanoa is a Pacifica cultural method that means to have dialogue. When broken down, the word Tala means story and the word Noa means to tie. It is through Talanoa that we look to tie our stories together in order to have a clear understanding about topics that impact our cutie pie as well as the greater queer, trans, black, indigenous, and people of color community.
Before we begin, Utopia Washington continues to recognize that we as diasporic indigenous people pull resources and reside on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and Puyallup tribes.
It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us and other settlers, colonizers, and indigenous peoples to reside on these lands, and to seek an analysis and continue understanding of our place within that history and present being.
Land recognition does not reside in the past tense or historical context. Colonialism is an ongoing weapon, and we need to find ways to build mindfulness of our present participation and how to truly stand in solidarity with First Nations people and how to support their health, their growth, and self-governance.
Indigenous First Nations peoples are still here, and we continue to thank them for their contributions.
We are honored by your presence this evening. Afio Maya, Talamaya.
Welcome to Talanoa.
Nisa Bolovinaka, and welcome again to our Talanoa. And this Talanoa will be diving into a conversation that's looking beyond desegregation. And before we start, happy summer. As we return from Memorial Day, summer has officially begun. And, we're ready for the jam-packed, festive June. And we're excited to celebrate Immigrant Heritage Month, Pride Month, Juneteenth, World Refuge Day, and so much more. And, every month, but especially in June, we recognize and honor the incredible contributions of immigrants and LGBTQI people to our society, and while also advocating for more inclusive and welcoming more diversity into the future. In this Talanoa, we'll be looking at a very important conversation about desegregation and looking beyond it. And before we start, I would like to open with a land acknowledgement. And it's important to know the history of the lands that we live and occupy, as Utopia Washington is based on CAD, on the lands of the Coast Salish people, especially the Muckleshoot and Duwamish and Puyallup nations. These lands were stolen by European settlers, and we were changed and degraded to accommodate their needs. With their lands being stripped away from them, and so are their rights to self-govern, let's continue to stand in solidarity and recognize the First Nations people, both past and present. And to dive into this amazing conversation, I welcome our panelists who will be joining us for this Talanoa dialogue. Wow, our amazing panelist. Hello and Bulavinaka.
Aloha, Masai.
Bulavanaka, Talofa.
Hi. So, we all, have probably been in a Talanoa dialogue or a panel conversation. So now I'll give it to you all to introduce yourselves, the usual name, pronouns, location, where you're from, and a brief about the amazing work that you do. Who wants to go first?
We're also okay. Go for it. I was going to say we're all too polite.
Who wants to be the brave one? But also
Hello,
in your
America.
introduction, Ikeka, the icebreaker question that we have today is, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Yeah, okay. So aloha mai kako. My name's Ikaika. I use Oya, they, and he pronouns. I am coming to you from Kaimuki, Oahu in the Pai'aina of Hawaii. And I'm a population health specialist at an organization called Papa Olelo Kahi, which is basically the Native Hawaiian Health Board. So we work on improving the health and well-being of Native Hawaiians, not only in the Pai'aina of Hawaii, but across sort of the continent, Mokuhonu. Um, and with regard to the icebreaker question, okay, so I was going back and forth, but I think I've settled on. Um, I would love to have dinner with one of our former mo'i, Princess Ruth Ke'likolani. She was, I love saying her name, but also she was just this amazing woman who was full of mana, and I think one of the things that I love most about her, not only like her presence in the kingdom, but also her her staunchness and not willing to speak English. She was like, "You are in my land; you will speak Hawaiian to me." And I think that's important, right? As settlers come through to say, like, no, like you need to recognize who I am, right? And my status here, and so you will speak to me in Olala Hawaii. And so that would be my person. I need to brush up on my Hawaiian if that's the case, but I would love to have dinner with her and be in her presence.
Thank you.
I
Well,
can jump
we can
in
popcorn
next.
style.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
go.
go ahead then.
Yeah.
I can just jump in. That is such a beautiful answer. And that's a good question. I wish I would have thought more about it. But just to introduce myself first, talofa, everyone. My name is Kiana McKenna. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Policy and Civic Engagement at the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, otherwise known as PICAWA. Their mission is to serve as a cultural home, center community power, and then advocate to further the wellness of all of our Pacifica communities, socially, spiritually, mentally, and physically. I've been there for 3 years, and I'm located in Spokane, Washington, which is on the east side of Washington State, where we actually have the second largest Marshallese population in the country, second behind Arkansas, since most people are curious about that. And yeah, it's an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. I think the first person that popped up into my head is not anybody well known, but somebody I was never able to meet, which is my grandfather, Ani Lakatani. He actually, we just had Memorial Day on Monday, so maybe that's why he is coming up top of mind. But he was actually killed in the Vietnam War, fighting on behalf of American Samoa when he was 19. So both me and then my father and a lot of our family don't have a lot of connection to him and just his lived experience. And so he's been on my mind a lot this week. And I think historically, I would love to go back in time and talk to him for a while. But thank you so much for having me. And I will popcorn it over to Regine.
Hey y'all, I'm Regine. You could also call me Reggie. I use they, them pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Programs at the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance, also known as NCAPA. It's Pride Month, or almost Pride Month. It's Pride Month almost, and like spring has me sprung. So I'm sitting here like I would love to have dinner with James Baldwin and just like have this person read to me in Paris at a cafe, like the most sensory poems they've ever written. Like that is what I would love to do. And I'll pass it off to Adriana.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I think I still have some fussy bovie in my throat from lunch earlier. My name is Adriana Suluai. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as our Systems, Environmental Policy, and Environmental and Cultural Change Program Director here at Utopia, Washington. So Utopia, for folks who who don't know or are just tuning in to our platform, stands for United Territories of Pacific Islanders Alliance in Washington. Our mission is we are actively replacing systems of oppression with ecosystems of care and safety for all our communities through Black and Brown organizing, prioritizing land and bodily autonomy, and to reclaiming our cultural narrative. Um, my work, I think I sit at kind of like at the intersection of not only being a trans woman, Fafine, but also a part of the NHPI community. I like to think of myself as a tool that I continue to echo the voices of our community members to ensure that a lot of the current systems disparities NHPI and LGBTQ community continue to face are being recognized. And there's a seat for us, or we're continuing to echo this throughout like all different platforms that we sit in.
Thank you, all of
Um,
you.
so
Okay, she's not done yet. Okay.
No, I'm not done. So this was a tough one because I was all like, "Ooh, do I go by the history books or do I just pick up somebody, a family member?" I think if I was to think of somebody um, that I really appreciated them or has really fueled me in some form, I think of Shalimar Sayuli. She was a trans woman and also a sex worker that was taken away from us earlier. I think if I was to have conversation with her, it would have been like, if you were still with us, what are some of the platforms or what if the son of the conversation that you would have loved to have to help elevate not only the LGBTQ, but also the Pacifica community, but also someone who was a sex worker. Prior to coming on to my new role, that was kind of like my role and my work. I did a lot of sex worker advocacy and support for a community that's often pushed away from spaces. And just challenged with a lot of the reason why they're sex workers with little to no access to services or resources and just being discriminated just for being a sex worker.
Thank you so much. Amazing conversations that we're about to dive into. And I also want to introduce myself, and I forgot to do that at the very beginning, and I must apologize. So I'm Amasai Cheke, your fabulous facilitator for this amazing conversation. I go by she and her pronouns, and and I serve as the Speak Change program coordinator here at Utopia, Washington. And if I were to answer that question, for me, it would be my father, because I didn't have enough time to to say goodbye, or probably to talk more about what he was feeling before he left me here and went into another world. But there are always it's always in my head that um, not that I feel guilty, but I miss him dearly, and I wish that I could have another sit down dinner and fun conversation with him. So yes, thank you again to all of you, and I think we can now dive into this conversation about desegregation and what that means. And I know, to make it more, simple for our viewers and also for community to understand this very big word, desegregation. And so what does desegregation mean to you all, and what does it mean? And why is it important in our work, and why it's important to so many intersectional work, and also why is it important to data? We can do popcorn style with this, so it's much more uniformed. You know, who wants to hula first?
I can start this time and take it and then popcorn. So disaggregation, it means so much. I like that you asked us what it means to us, because I think it encompasses lots of big and smaller things. So to be more specific, I think when we say disaggregation or we say disaggregate, I think we're asking for a very active, stance and actions in themselves against a very racist act of and a very racist construct that all people can be lumped together one. And I think that's what happened with our Pacifica communities, with other Asian and Asian American communities. And so when we talk about disaggregation in the context of what it means for us as Pacifica peoples, we think of it as in the context of we were lumped with Asian and Asian Americans, which is a very different community, which is a community which has its own issues, own needs, deserves its own visibility, just like ours. And I think when we break it down further, we know that this aggregation of our communities, which whether it came out of the imperialistic conquests of the U.S., finding Asians in Pacifica Island nations and finding Pacifica people in Asian countries because of the U.S. military. We know that the aggregation, the bringing together of our communities, this lumping, has contributed to decades of political and funding disinvestment for Pacifica communities specifically. And an example of that is the fact that in Washington state, we have 0 elected officials that identify as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. And we have seen a lot of new Pacifica organizations being kind of coming up that serve NHPI, but we see a longer legacy of Asian-led organizations who have not necessarily always served NHPI. And we've also seen erasure just across the board, a lack of awareness for our people, where we're coming from, our thriving, who we are, and in turn, also the issues that we're facing as a community. So we've seen a lack of resource allocation because people forget about us. And I think it's important to, the last thing I'll say in terms of what disaggregation means to me, this was not only a racist construct that was created by people who are outside of our community, but it's also something that's being held up by the racism that we hold inside of ourselves. And this is one way that I sometimes look at it is, as communities of color that have been oppressed or historically excluded from systems, institutions, policies, whatever way you want to look at it, we have internalized racism within ourselves, and these are beliefs that we hold that are grounded in white supremacy, and we can think of it as a racial inferiority. So us feeling like we cannot do it on our own, and that has helped to hold up this aggregation or hold up this movement from moving forward. And I think we also have to examine how it's affected our Asian and Asian American counterparts in terms of, how do we be in deeper solidarity with them and make sure we're lifting them up so they can get visibility as well? And how are we examining the model minority myth? And the two sides of that being both one that Asian Americans can be superhuman, but they can also be subhuman. And how do we examine privilege around that and resentment that can be fostered because of that with other communities of color? And so I'm just so happy that we're here in this space today. I'm happy that we have a really diverse panel to talk about this issue and build that solidarity that we so deeply need, rather than moments of scarcity or competition. So I will pass it to Regine next.
Awesome. I was hoping that you would pass it to me because as soon as we started going to like AA and EPI stuff, I was like, ooh, that's my job. But when I think about like disaggregation, I think about AA and HPI being this big tangle of a bunch of threads. And disaggregation means to me to untangle that. And with the power of disaggregation and untangling that and understanding community specific stories, community specific access needs, their specific strengths as well, you could actually recalibrate a movement to be a lot more aligned and in solidarity with some key goals, right? And like I think we have inherited a term inherited a political term that does not always do us a big service. It's very confusing, and for me, it's a tangle. It's the because the world is round, it's round, it's not flat. Because the world is round, it's the other side of the globe, and so we have a huge amount of variance in this big umbrella that can definitely, just like what Kiana was sharing, big funding inequities and even educational inequities, which is where my expertise is in disaggregation. A lot of people, when we talk about the model minority myth, stop there. When I'm like, no, we actually should start at racial triangulation because it's a system of manipulation for white supremacy. And sometimes the AA and HPI, sometimes the lack of disaggregation makes it so that we're actually triangulating against each other instead of in solidarity towards a specific goal. So for me, disaggregation means to untangle things and to really be in alignment with each other after we know what the specific threats are. I'm gonna pass it off to Ikaika.
Yeah, I'm similar to you. I was actually just like, oh, I hope they pass it on to me because actually I had I'm loving this flow. But yeah, I echo what everyone else is saying, and I think for me, I think when we, along with sort of that idea of untangling, right? I think a lot of times when we think of disaggregation, not a lot of times, maybe some of the times it comes up in this scarcity model that, well, if we disaggregate the data, then this finite pie of resources is going to get split up and then we're going to get less, right? Or that they're going to be at the front and then we're not going to be at the front anymore, rather than, right, sort of this collective hui of all of our canoes going together, right? Everyone can have their own canoe, but as long as our is pointing in the right direction towards whatever that liberation looks like, right, then we ourselves can actually get there together. So I think that there's that piece, and the other part that for me that rings true around disaggregation is like taking a place like Hawaii, right? So we have a large, in terms of the AA and HPI community, right? We have a large population of us here as an umbrella group, right? But if we keep that in that sort of construct that was placed upon us, right, then we wouldn't actually be able to drill down to say, well, actually the whole, like the Kanaka, the Hawaiians need this, or our Samoan cousins need this, right? So it's also sort of splitting that up so that we can also, again, kind of seek that liberation of what works in our specific communities, but also seeing those commonalities of like, oh, I got you. Like, that seems really good for you there. Let's try it out here, right? Because we do have some commonalities as well. So I echo what everyone else is saying, but I just want to add that piece in. I'm going to kick it to you, Adriana.
I don't know. It's so hard. I was like, okay, well, so what else can I add into it out of all of that? Well, I'll give it a shot because I feel like everybody is on point with kind of like a lot of the issues and concerns of why it's important to disaggregated data. But for me, it also paints a picture. It paints a picture of diversity, and especially when we really break it down, we see like the needs of each groups that are sitting currently under the subgroup. Because like for far too long, the AAPI umbrella that's currently like, hey, we'll just house everybody here, is contributing to a lot of erasure, not only for the NHPI community, some of our South Asian, East Asian communities, and other communities underneath the umbrella. And if we're working towards systems to address kind of like racial equity for all our communities, like this is a conversation and something that we as a collective need to continue to push because we need that data. We need to understand all the different disparities that our communities continue to face because that's how we can inform the work that we do as organizers. Because where does all of this come from? Of course, it's going to be coming from community, but how do we inform that work? We inform that work by disaggregation of data, just really breaking it down, dissecting it to learn more about from different ethnic groups or from different groups underneath the AA and HPI umbrella.
Amazing. Thank you so much for really breaking it down from, from untangling things to navigating ways of, the way that we inform the different ways of working. And, we can then talk about now the how can we really support the AA and NHPI communities to actively advocate for their needs and priorities, and what resources and support are needed to promote community-based initiative and grassroots effort in all this amazing work, and how do we address it specifically looking beyond um, you know this work. Oh, quiet.
I can
Thank
Reggie, I see you. Yeah.
go. Okay. Me? Okay. um, I think so. I think there's and I guess my mind when I was thinking about this question, I think my mind kind of goes to sort of a little bit of like supply and demand, right? I feel like our community needs to be asking for this. I feel like we need to continue to be asking for this. I think every individual should be asking for this, right? And really putting that pressure on not only policymakers, but sort of like, people who hold power, like power holders. I feel like we need to, so I think the thing with along with asking for it, we need to also, if you're in a position of funding, I think we need to be funding things at the community level, right? And not necessarily, or in specific communities, right? And not sort of like funding the umbrella and just assuming that it's going to trickle down to different communities. I think we need to be really intentional about where resources are spent. I think we also need to be, those of us in the community, I would really love for us to also be supporting other sort of like researchers, other data heads, right, that are wanting to do this, right? Not everyone's a data person, not everyone is a policy person. Like, I love a good spreadsheet. I know that's not everybody, right? But like, we need to find our people in that way, right? And also groom them to be able to take on the mantle and that kuleana, so that we have more people that's kind of coming in our wake of this data piece that's going to support the other people who are sort of doing programming pieces. And not that they need to be mutually exclusive, but I do think that that we need to create the demand, and we also need to serve that demand as well. And then we need to also get that funding in, get those dollar bills, into our communities to do that work, and then show that as we do that in a really intentional way, that this is the reason why disaggregation is important.
Yes, so we need to create and serve those demands. So yeah.
serve them all. Yes. Kiana, do you want to go?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Did you say Adriana or Kiana?
Kiana.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Always like the Anna gets me every time. Yeah, I completely 100% agree. And I think that this question is kind of two-pronged in the sense of, what as a community can we be doing to support each other in this work? And then the second question being like, what are we asking of people outside of our communities? So just as a start, I think conversations like this are really important. One, because it's really important that we build our collective understanding of issues like this together, and that we analyze these things together and understand what it means for me, what it means for everybody in this group, and any of our siblings, our Pacifica siblings who are not here. It's important for us to be sitting in space like this and collectivizing our voice, right? And building our civic power. And how do we civically engage around this issue, because we want to usher in a world that we want our elders to live in and our future descendants to live in. And we want to also resist the ways that we have even accepted unjust realities as is. And so I think on one end there's that, and I think being in solidarity with each other and community to make this work move forward is so important. Like I said before, not working in scarcity, not working in competition, and resisting those things. And I think on the other side, when we look outside of our Pacifica community, one, we how do we work better with other communities of color who are also working towards the same things? How are we lifting up those most affected, whether it's those within our Pacifica community or those outside of our Pacifica community? How are we working against anti-blackness, and how are we working with Indigenous peoples in the continental U.S., recognizing also that our Native Hawaiian siblings are Indigenous to this country as well. And so I think, unrestricted multi-year funding, 100%. We need unrestricted funds because we can self-determine how we use those dollars. Thank you, funders. And we also need it for multi-year. 1 year is not going to do much for our communities. This will be decades long work, and we need the funding. So 100%, I lift that up. We also we ask communities outside of our own, we ask institutions, systems, community members to use disaggregated language. Please do not talk about our communities in tandem with other communities when you're talking about issues that are specific to us. Please do your own research and educate yourself on Pacifica peoples and what you can do to support us. Google is a great resource. We love 2023 for its amazing educational resources that can be found online. And I think as far as systems and institutions go, and when I say some systems and institutions, I mean systems like healthcare, policing, the justice system. How can I think that one, disaggregate your data and who you're serving, make sure you know who you're serving and how they're being affected by your services. Are there disparities popping up that you need to address? And then I think too, and I could go on and on with this question, but I think that just the engagement with our communities it has been not there for so long. And what I mean by this is before the pandemic, I had so little interaction with different systems and institutions that our people are in every single day. Hospitals, the policing system, like the Department of Licensing, like things that we interact with every day. And those systems have not intentionally reached out to our communities to say, how can we better serve you? And it creates a huge barrier, not only in understanding, but also in any kind of support that we might get for our community to be served better. So, things like language access, and also recognizing that culture, if you are a system or an institution or funder, whatever it might be, that serves social determinant of health, those are the things like transportation, healthcare, education. Do you recognize that culture is our sixth determinant of health as a Pacifica people, and that it is an absolute for our communities? And how are you recognizing that for us as Pacifica people? So I think, I could go on and on with this question, but the engagement is so important. And taking the initiative to learn about our communities is so important. And I will pass it to Adriana.
Thank you, Kiana. Well, you pop up, girl. I love that.
Thank you.
I think for me, as we looking to support this work, I think some of the very important things I often think about is how are we mobilizing our community, or how is community being engaged in this conversation? Because prior to us having to go to the policymakers, having to have those conversations with a lot of decision makers, we need to have these conversations with our community on the support needed and why is the disaggregation of data very important to help further their work. Those are like extremely important conversations that needs to be had, especially when we're looking to equip, to mobilize, to really structure out how we as NHPI's communities can not only push to elevate our own folks, but what the solidarity look like with other communities who are also doing this work, because this is some of the very important aspects. And if you're a funder and you're looking to be very intentional about the work that you're trying to fund or trying to be woke, especially getting involved with these organizations, it's an NHPI organization doesn't necessarily mean that it's also an NHPI organization. I think it is also for a lot of funders, it's their due diligence that they need to do their research. They really need to do that research. If they're looking to support NHPI communities, reach out to a lot of the NHPI folks who are currently within your local or even national work to help inform you about the steps that you're looking to take, or the outcomes that you're looking to fund. I think those are some of the very important things that we have when we're asking funders to be intentional. It's that you also need to be out in community. Like, you need to be out in your local community, seeing who's out there, seeing what work that they're doing, and what you as a funder can come in to provide that support for these grassroots organizations.
Reggie?
Ooh. When I heard this question, it like snatched my body back to when I was working in like the university, which was I worked there for like 6 years. I was also a student at that same university for 4 years. So seeing a decade of what happened when California passed the Assembly Bill 1726, which disaggregated education and health data in California, we started seeing that in the university system. And I was like sitting with this incredibly well-paid person who is also like very educated, who is like, I don't understand why we need to disaggregate data if it means that we have a size of people, maybe like 8 people. That's not statistically relevant. And being able to immediately push back as a community and say, like, we are all individually and collectively relevant. We're not leaving anyone behind in this data. And to kind of turn that table and be like, what this data reveals is not about the individual, but about the systems that have impacted them. So one example that I had was I worked with undergraduate students, and the majority of our Pacifica students were transfer students. So they have 2 years less than a traditional student to get the mentorship, career development, internships, employment opportunities that everyone else got. If we know this is a structural barrier and will impact people's success, for example, to enter graduate school, where we need like our scholars to be preserving heritage, preserving language, knowledge, agriculture, all of that. Like we started doing interventions for transfer students where it was like, okay, we're going to put you on an accelerated path for mentorship. That means when we get statements of intent to enroll at this university, and we notice in the data there are 10 Pacifica people enrolled for next year, which sometimes it's that small of a group. We're going to at least find one so we can have that one help us find everyone else. If there's only going to be 10 of you all 10 of you all will be able to be in the same dialogue and support group. That kind of intervention is so important, because think about it, that university has a population of 40,000 students and you're one of 10. So that immediate feeling of social isolation, of like cultural difference, of like the academic rigor, it's immense. And so at least having that little lifeboat of 10 other people and saying like, this is statistically relevant because all of you are, is important. We were able to do interventions that like serve people's like cultural like needs. For example, the food was not on point on purpose, like that. We didn't have any specific classes on history, or even talking about like we just got a Asian American minor at that university, and now pushing for let's use that framework, that model of success, to push for an additional range of study for this specific community. I just think when the biggest barriers to disaggregation and using that effectively honestly isn't us. It's institutions that want to shield their specific failures because they don't want to like make an intervention that is specific and saying like, actually, no, you have a responsibility to us all. Therefore, you must disaggregate, and therefore you must customize the supports you give. It was not easy to get that done, but I also think I can name for you a lineage of like Pacifica students from that university who are all now educators or who are all now in law, and are supporting each other through undergrad all the way to them going to grad school and possibly teaching in their communities.
Thank you.
Can I
Yes,
say
go
one
ahead.
more? Both Kiana and Adriana's comment like made me think about it as well. I think with regards to funding and regards to sort of success, right? I think that just to also like call out here too, like when we start looking at disaggregated data or really sort of like specific and intentional programming, right? That really allowing organizations and communities like us to define what success looks like, right? Because if you start using sort of that Western colonial model of what success looks like in whatever metric and not questioning that, then we roll differently. Our communities roll differently, right? And so, like I will say from a Hawaiian standpoint, I know it's not only a Kanaka thing, but like, right, we highly value relationships, right? So we might spend a lot of time talking about relationships at the beginning part and establishing that pilina. For someone else, that might look like a waste of time, but for us, we know that that's creating buy-in. That's also like seeing each other. That might look like food. So if that restricted funding is saying that you cannot actually like purchase food, that actually like hinders how we do our work, right? And so I also just want to kind of just call that out in particular. And if it's a questioning of like, well, we've always done it this way, or we need to compare it to a previous year, which I sometimes hear right in the research world, like I understand that. And also if the assumption was based 40 years ago off of a Western colonial construct of data and we moved on as a community, right? Then we need to question, is that worth, right? Like actually doing good work in community. And I would argue that we need to kind of be okay with letting that go so that we can actually do this work, right? Because liberation is not only is going to come with like that's how we've done it. Liberation is going to come with us actually doing good work. So that's my last thing I'll say. Sorry.
Thank you. Amazing. No, really, we went from, the importance of creating and, serve demands of community, but also the importance of, talking about unrestricted funds and what this look like. A lot of time institutions, like Kiana said, institutions continue to keep taking from us, and we're building already our community wealth for our community, and then we have institutions that come in and say, oh, we need this in order for you to take A, B, and C. And Adriana, solidarity are very important in our work, but we also need to unpack, what does that solidarity look like within our movements, and what does that look like within our community. And it's this, and Reggie, institutions have a big responsibility. Institutions, duty barriers, those that have sworn, to take up, to look after communities. And you are very true that it's institution that, coin words to kind of best throw it at people to say that, oh, this is what it looks like. And what does um, the model of success really looks like in different components and within a different culture. And these panelists, oh, they have oversmart this conversation, because our next, we're really gonna go into, what steps can, institution and service provider take to provide, culturally responsive services to meet the unique needs and experiences of, AA and NHPI communities, but looking beyond it, and such as language, such as access to healthcare, and also education. So, how can we ensure that these services um, that are delivered in a way that's culturally component and responsive? There's a lot of nodding.
I'm happy to start. I'm always conscientious of like nobody wants to go first,
Yeah.
right? I'm happy to though. So I think this is a great question, and one, I think that when we look at services and culturally specific services that will better support our people, one, it's really nice to be a part of the system that is creating those services, and so I love seeing more representation, in healthcare and in education. And I know that we're always all being invited to different tables, right? And I want us to just acknowledge, and I want to just say that one, a specific thing that can be helpful is that when you invite a Pacifica person or somebody from a historically excluded community to the table, recognize that you built that table or you built that system, and make sure that you're inviting us with the intention of actually letting us to help reshape that table or that system, and make sure it's an inclusive space for us to do so in. Recognize that we are not tokens, and we do not speak on behalf of our entire community. I do not speak on behalf of all Samoans, nor do I definitely not speak on behalf of other Melanesian and Micronesian populations, right? And then lastly, if your table is far too broken, please let us rebuild it.
Yeah.
And let us rebuild it. We're not asking to tear anything down without also being there with our effort to help want to rebuild that thing up to better serve all people. So I think one, I just want to say that because too often I think we have spaces and tables that one, there's not enough representation, and there's a lot of asks of communities of color to do the labor and making, helping to make services more culturally appropriate, but there's not an investment in actually bringing those people in to help shape those things. So that's the first thing I want to say. Some more specifics, like language access is something that I think is like half of my conversations right now. And I mean, my conversations change like by the month, but language access is impacting so many health outcomes for our people within so many systems. And so, specifically, a lot of systems and institutions, our government system, they measure by top 15 most spoken languages in the system or in the state. Our Pacifica people specifically will never make those lists. Our Pacifica languages will never make those lists. And so how do we equitably shift that and be like, how do we make sure we're actually reaching those that need us to reach them the most? That is equity. And so how about we ask the question of what are the top 5 most ESL or English as a second language communities? Or what are the top 5 growing communities with English as a second language? Invest in those questions and know that it will cost money to invest in those questions and do it. Where are there systems or where are there policies in place that are not serving us? And where can we divest from those and take that money and put it back into more equitable questions, systems, policies like language access? I think one of the biggest excuses of why I hear systems not accommodating for languages that are not those top 15 is cost. And we have to invest in this because one, it's the law, and we cannot discriminate against those or turn away people within systems because they speak a different language that is not English. And two, like I said earlier, when we serve those most impacted and those most in need, it will naturally lift all of us up. And so language access is so huge. There's so many more specifics that I can go into, and I know we will dive into that. But I think asking more equity focused questions and not being afraid to lean away from systems that are so strongly in place, and even rebuild them. It does not have to be just tearing down. It is absolutely what is moving beyond, what is the reimagining of the new system that could actually better serve our people. And that was built with our people right there and not as an afterthought or no thought at all. And so I'm going to stop there, but I'm sure I might pop in later with more.
I'll go next. I love that we're having, and I love that you brought up, like, inviting community to be a part of the building process. But I think for institutions, it's also very important that you also inform yourselves as an institution along with your staff. I think quite so often we hear the word solidarity and inclusive, and yet that practice is not reflected on it's either people of the institution or people that they serve. It can come and do like different kind of forms. I think as communities of colors, we see different forms of microaggressions that community face. And if you are really as an institution looking to be a part of this work, it's also do your own research and also challenge your own systems. That's the very important thing I tell people. It's like challenge your own systems as an institution with how well you are informed. If you've had any type of training for your staff, whether it be trauma informed or even gender 101. I think those are important things that you are equipping your own team with the right resources that when you approach organizations who are doing this grassroots work, you have an idea with like support that you as an institution can provide for these orgs. Quite so often we hear from institutions like, what support do you need? I think that question also needs to be reframed as, here is what we can do for you. Quite so often we hear that a lot of time. It's like, hey, what support do you need? And I'm like, what do you got? What do you have to offer? Like, I can list down many like numbers and numbers of things, but if you as an institution or has those resources that you're looking to share or co-collaborate with other organizations, it's like be mindful about that. It's like when you're like, what can I do for you? Or it's here's what I have and here's what I can provide for you to help uplift your community. And these are some of the resources.
I want to jump in real quick if I can, unless Reggie, you're ready to go. No. So, like, I think, and just like, yes, and I want to kind of answer this in I think in two prongs, right? One is just sort of this recognition that currently where I live and where I operate of is our homeland in terms of like in Hawaii, right? And then we have also Hawaiians living in diaspora, right? Like there are multiple things that are there. I echo everything that everyone else has said in terms of like how and when you're inviting us to that table, right? Like if it's at the 11th hour, it's like we just want you to sign off on this and let it go. Like that is not the time nor the place nor appropriate to invite us to the table, right? We want to like when we're in the idea generation realm, when we're in the background sort of like research realm, invite us to the table. Let's start talking, right? And I think because I also think that like when you invite, the danger of inviting us in sort of the 11th hour is that at least from my perspective, right, for Hawaiians in particular, like we would call it sort of like ikekupuna, right, like sort of the ancestral knowledge that we're also bringing into this space that can also challenge what structures, what is the skeleton in which might being operated out of at step 1 versus when you're bringing us in at step 11. So like an example of that, right, is like when we think about including Hawaiian information and knowledge and cultural ways of knowing into, say, our education system, right? We would, if you invite us in at the tail end and you're only thinking about like, can we get a kumu or a teacher, right, to sit in a classroom and teach the keiki, teach the homana, the students, right? That is very different than saying, we want to build a school that centers Hawaiian knowledge and ikekupuna, and how do we build what knowledge looks like in order to make sure that our homana, our students are the most prepared for the next generation of what we need to do, right? And so what we're seeing, right, is that a lot of like Hawaiian folks and a lot of schools started popping up, Hawaiian charter schools that are in Hawaiian, like that are saying that we want our students to be able to speak Olelo Hawaii and also English, right? And also we want to ground it in Aina-based work, right? We want to put them out of the classroom, back onto the Aina, back into the land. They can work the lo'i. You can like get your hands dirty because there's also knowledge in the working, in the doing, right? In the building of something, in the dancing of the hula, in the chanting that ole. There is ancestral knowledge there, right? Those are two very different ways of approaching how do we include Hawaiian culture into an institution, say in this example, sort of education, right? So I think it's about that approach. It's about how we do that, and also not just looking at us from a place of scarcity in terms of like the cultural trauma that has happened to us, which of course has happened, but also what is that abundance model of what resilience factors that we have and what we bring to the table and what we're tapping into, right? So I will pause there. That's my little soapbox moment. Reggie, you can go.
Thank you. When you started talking, I immediately thought of like my Kanaka students that I used to have, and how like we already know. Okay, the United States is a colonizer. The university is a colonizer as well. Education system is a colonizer as well. So of course, like communities that are coming from this background are having challenges with these big systems that have promoted things like assimilation and promoted things like language loss and culture loss. Um, so one of the ways that I find it's helpful to do culturally competent and responsive work is to stop doing the bare minimum. Like you all talked about people inviting you all at the last hour. It's like how many of those last hour invites are for folks to perform a dance? Um, and simply just to dance and not actually go into people's brains about what is their passion, like what are they wanting to contribute and lift up in their community. When we started doing disaggregated career advising, I was consulting career advisors and sharing with them. It's like we can't use a white model of success. Like you go to college, you get a job at Wall Street, you get a house or whatever. That's just ridiculous. That's not even it. So we started asking different kinds of questions of students, like with the knowledge and power that you get from this institution, how do you want to serve the people you come from? That had so much more emotional and spiritual, psychological tie to our Pacifica students than how much money do you want to make after the university, right? Moving it from an individualistic to a communal construct is really helpful in helping people persist, because it wasn't about you one of 10 succeeding or not succeeding. It was about you being the champion of the people who raised you, the people who nurtured you, and hopefully one day being able to return that to them and return that to the place you're from. When it comes to culturally competent or responsive work, like if you're only inviting people to do work that is consumable and easy to digest, you're not asking them at the right time, you're not asking them for the right thing either. I think you should be asking really hard questions that get to why is this place, why is this service like one that doesn't feel well for you? Like why does career services feel like you're going into like a doctor's office rather than like an auntie's office, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that is really close to my heart. Is if we're gonna invite people to the table, like don't tokenize them. Like actually get to know who they really are. Otherwise, you kind of run the risk of stereotyping them and making them into these tropes, which is actually the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is to humanize people.
Yeah. Reggie, there's some sort of sound, I think, is coming when you're talking. When you're talking, I think it's. Are you close by the beach, or you're just on the highway by the road, or
I don't know. Is it better now?
yes?
Okay, cool. Okay. Did y'all hear me earlier?
You did for yeah, but it was just a background sound that was kind of yeah. But amazing closing point on let's don't tokenize people and also those that come to the table. But there's always this amazing thing, and I would say in last year's Utopia Luau where we closed the Luau by why do we always have to ask people to bring us to the table? When girl, we can create our own table, and we can bring our own people to our own table, and we can have our own food and discussion at our own table, and putting to Adriana's, around challenging our own system in a way that we're able to do that. And um, I like this kind of activist, feminist kind of movement around. We have to move in guerrilla style of organizing and activism, because if we don't get to shake things and move things, things will still stay the same. And Kiana, you shared an important about equity and how that's important. It's important in funding. It's important in language. Language access is very important, and paramount in the way that we do this work. And Ikaika, we were in New Zealand, Montana, organizing a Pacific Village initiative, and the importance of ancestral knowledge and into our work. And we honor our kupuna, our elders, in our line of work, because it's the mana that comes within our culture and tradition, and that's embedded in the way that we continue to do this amazing set of work. And I wanna also just go beyond, just the work around data. And I know Ika can, and the rest of you love data so much and research. And Kiana, I wanna put the spotlight on you, and also Ika, Reggie, jump in, and Adriana. The amazing work that you're starting to collect data specifically for NHBI communities. The amazing work that Pika is doing around that. Do you want to talk more about that, data collection? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would love to. And thank you so much for lifting that up. I'm so happy that we get to work with Utopia on this. This has been over a year-long process of building a data report, which we're not done yet, but look forward to it later in the summer. And I'm going to start by saying that this data report project that we're working on, specifically for Washington Pacifica peoples, began out of a relationship. And so I want to lift up what Kaika said about relationship building, is that this funder actually invested and paid us to engage in relationship building with them and trust building, to the point that they were able to learn that we needed data disaggregation to be able to address any of the issues within our community. So they actually funded a data report. They funded our organization to put together a data report that would show disaggregated data just for Pacifica peoples and would be owned by Pacifica peoples. And so, in our contract for this data, we say this data belongs to Pacifica peoples and can be used by Pacifica peoples, in the advocacy and the furthering of our wellness. This data report is specifically built around PICA's 12 wellness policy priorities. These are priorities that we have. They're almost like a second set of values for us as an organization, but they've been informed by community at many different levels. There are things like housing justice, police accountability, immigration justice reform, queer and trans Pacific Islander inclusion, language access. And so all of these policy priorities we have collected data on. And what we have found in the process is that, one, we are using data sets such as the US Census, which, as many people know, is collected every 10 years by the US government. We have used the American Community Survey, which is collected every 5 years. And we have found that not only has this data, which is the only data that's available to us right now, not only has this data not been collected by Pacifica peoples, but we have found that there is in many cases, there has been a lack of engagement by Pacifica peoples for a variety of reasons. Many people remember, in the context of the 2020 US Census, there were a lot of fears around participating in that data collection, whether it be for your immigration status, your housing status, if you're living in a multi-generational home, your status here in the US. And so we find that the data is some of it is different to what we know when we're serving our communities. I know that the households that I serve when I do direct services, because I can't help myself, when I do direct services, I know that the households I'm serving have anywhere from 8 to 12 people living in them on average. The data we found says that the highest number of household members in a Marshallese home is 6. We know that that is wrong, right? We know that there's a likelihood of a family of 6 maybe participating in that survey more so than a family of 12. And so we know that the data that we have in this report has been limited in the way that it's been collected, and the way that we're able to show it. But what we do know is that we serve our communities, we know our communities, and so it's really important for us in this report to be able to say, this is where we don't find this data accurate. And this is where this data does not align with us as a community. And what we know working with Utopia has allowed us to see further is that there is so little data for our cutie pie siblings, almost none. And it's so not helpful when we also know that our cutie pie siblings are experiencing some of the most disparate health outcomes. And so we know that it's not going to be the most perfect data report, but it's a start. And we're grateful that we have had so many amazing leaders that have been organizing for data disaggregation for a long time. This is not just like the last couple of years that people have been trying for this. This has been decades. And so we because of that, we do have some disaggregated data, right? And a lot of that data does point towards some of our strengths as a community and also some of our worst health outcomes. And hopefully it will continue to open up and visibilize those issues which have been either erased or left invisible for a very, very long time. So we're really excited to engage on this report and to actually lead something that's for our people and by our people, rather than something that's been given to us or put in front of us by a government system, some institution, another white savior. It's so exciting to do something by Pacifica for Pacifica, and we hope that it will only be the bottom of the building block stack, and we want to just keep building on it with community.
Amazing. Thank you, Kiana. Ikeka, I know you love data and research as well. And, you can touch base on that and maybe also a little bit on the data equity that we talked about at the Pacific Village Initiative. If you want to, and how that's all linked together into kind of the work.
Yeah. I mean, what I what I love is that kind of folks like got funding to do that work, right? I'm just brought back to sort of like how many years have we gone without funding, like our various communities not doing it, and if we think about sort of like the labor like disproportionately shared out, like a lot of our communities are doing our own sort of like digging through all the data to find what is the realities of our community on our own dime, right? Like on our without funding, and then are expected to do all the outcomes that everyone else is we had the extra homework to do because we care about our community so much, right? So and so I love that more light is being shown and more resources are being given to actually say like we need to do this work, right? Really quickly, because it was on my mind and I forgot to share this at the last point, and I think it's still relevant now, right? Is that I think sometimes when we look at whether it's data, whether it's programming, whether it's being invited to the table, right? Sometimes just to also recognize that our concepts, our words, our values isn't always also a one-to-one translation to sort of English, right? So in terms of thinking about our Pacifica Village Initiative work, right, and thinking about our cutie pies, our queer and trans Pacific Islanders, right, like we collectively were even like having internal discussion around like, is that, can we all agree that being an umbrella term for all of us? And we're still kind of mulling through that conversation. And I personally love cutie pie, right? As something that encompasses all of us. It's super cute, it's super kitschy. I think a lot of people are jealous that they can't use it themselves. But right, like when we think about queer and trans and we think about Hawaiian in particular, and Mapu'olelo Hawaii, like Mahu would be that word, but Mahu is way more spacious and expansive than queer and trans, right? And so and I get into conversations sometimes with people, and they in their effort to understand are so um tightly held on to, like, but it needs to be a one-to-one equal, and it's like, but it's not, right? And we need to be okay that it's not.
Yeah.
And so, so I think that that's also a benefit in terms of us collecting our own data or digging into our own things, because then we can actually begin to create definitions, words, language that actually fits our communities, right? To say, like, this is a more accurate representation of who we are, right? um I'm struck by a conversation that we were having in Montana around, you know, props to our Ohana at Utopia Portland, and the work that they were doing in terms of their data, and Virginia in particular, around looking at sort of the like a fish scale model versus a Likert scale model around sort of less abundant to more abundant, right? Instead of a 0 or a 1, that maybe it's a bonefish, because we know that in our communities, even though there's bones and there's maybe a little bit of meat on those bones, we're going to make something out of it, right? So it's not that we don't have nothing, we still got something, right? And then you move into like a little fish and a big fish and then many fish, and so we can begin to look at sort of like, what does that mean for us in terms of scales that work for our community. And we are looking to do that, I think, within our Pacifica Village initiative, so that we as a hui, as a group, as an ohana, as a family, that we can begin to say, like, collectively across sort of the what we call this country, right? Like that there are some commonalities, and we do need our funders to fund these things when we're looking at cutie pie folks. And I think what I also love about what Kiana shared, and I just want to also uplift, is like, who owns the data after it's done, right? When you give those resources, that we need to be able to own our data, that you can't just give us those funds and then that data lives somewhere else, right? Because it's important. It's still our mo'olelo, it's still our stories, right? And that's important to us. Stories are important to us. And so we want to make sure that that lives on. And from a Hawaiian worldview, right, it belongs to the lahui. It belongs to everybody. It doesn't belong to one entity, right? Like, we might be the stewards and the shepherds of it, but like, this is for the lahui to use, right? And so that's important, as well as we think about where that data lives. Of course, confidentiality aside, but like in terms of the collective pieces. Yeah.
Amazing.
That's another, like,
Yeah.
oh,
Go ahead, Adrian.
hi, Amma. I think that's kind of like the beautiful about doing this work, and especially as Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders who's spearheading this data collection, it's, we know what to put on there. We know what to ask our community, and we also know what support community needs after they've taken studies. My biggest thing is about a lot of study, it's also reintroducing community to like trauma that they've either experienced in life, but through this lens to how we organize and how we mobilize like resources. We also need to make sure that we are ready to provide that support for our community members. You know, like what Kiana said, like it won't be perfect. I mean, it won't be like the full on, but we'll have a picture and we'll know where the work needs to go from here. I think that is kind of like the beauty about like gathering data. It's really painting the picture of our community, our needs. But it's also very important. I forgot to mention this the last time. It's pay us for our stories. Like for funders, yeah, you need to pay us for our stories. I think for far too long, like our culture has been romanticized in kind of like different spaces, but we're more than that. We're also a people with rich history, with a lot of cultural practices that means a lot to us as Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and as well as ethnic groups with other communities. Thank you, I'll throw it back to you.
And Reggie, the whole, what would be like a national focus, national mechanisms in place for data inequity and all of this.
You and I are both part of the Outreach Council for the U.S. Trans Survey underneath the National Center for Transgender Equity or
Yes.
Equality. Oops. So I think this is the first time they're doing it. Don't get hit me if I'm like incorrect, but they are going to do a breakout report for NHPI like trans folks. And already what Ikaku was sharing is like, okay, the language in that report is going to need to be different. And we're going to need to be able to position transgender identified folks away from like a white colonial gaze in order to do justice to this report. Um, and one of the opportunities that the NCTE and the US Trans Survey could have with this is to invite practitioners who are already of the people of the land to go ahead and help write this narrative, put the soul to the bones, and the bones is the hard numbers that we received. Um, one thing that I know that they're going to be doing is they're going to be doing community focus groups just to be like, what do you even want to know from all of the questions we asked on the US Trans Survey? What is the most important information for you all? What is going to be the most important data pieces for the grants that you are applying for? Like, that is the first step. And then we're already thinking about, okay, who's going to be the narrative team writing out this report? Then how do we roll out this report to people of all sorts of different educational and language backgrounds? So that's going to be one of the huge experience / challenges / opportunities of this run of the US Trans Survey, is making sure that Incapia was at the table, and we made sure that there was other organizations that were Pacifica identified at the table. And when we were able to do that, something that we saw is a doubling of people being counted in American Samoa for the first time. Like, they were like, oh, we have 6 people who responded, and then one of our friends went over, visited family, and all of a sudden you had it triple. That's the opportunities that we could have if we actually ask people to work with us on our teams, compensated, paid for our brains, and not just for our ability to spread a message. I hope that's what we get out of that report. I'll be there at those meetings, and I'll share some more info with Amasai. So in case other organizations want to be in on the NHPI breakout report for the US Trans Survey, y'all can be in it too.
Yeah, and I think one of the amazing things that we've seen at the U.S. Trans Survey is that there was a 10% increase in NHPI folks who did the survey, particularly folks from Hawaii and American Samoa that were able to do this. They were able to take the U.S. Trans Survey, and of course, by the wonderful support of NCAPIA, to help us disseminate this information, to bring communities together, to have gatherings, to have this survey taken, and the importance of data. And now that we are going into, things that we've talked about in the beginning around systems and racism, so how can we work to address systemic racism and bias that AA and NHPI communities face, but also what policies and strategies are needed to promote anti-racism education and training, and to address the structural inequalities that really impact AA and NHPI communities, and how can we collaborate, to create a more equitable and a just society for all. Who's the brave one? Is it you, Kiana?
Hopefully, just because I'm laughing, I can't. I don't mind at all. Yeah, this is a big old question you got, Amasai. But I'll take a stab at it, and I know my fellow panelists will help me out here. So I think when we talk about addressing systemic racism, I want to go back to what I said at the beginning, of that it's so important to collectivize our voice, and build our civic power as a community. It's also, in that all of our advocacy work that we do within systems, we are fighting for laws that are just and humane. And in saying that, I'm also recognizing that there are a lot of laws and a lot of policies out there that are not just and are not humane. And I think one of the best pieces of wisdom that was gifted to me by one of my elders is that we can recognize that many, if not most, if not all, and I would say all, but maybe there's something I'm not thinking of. But many of our systems were built grounded in white supremacy, and and also we know that the cost of upholding white supremacy is our humanity. And we know that the individuals that uphold white supremacist systems and systems that oppress people and keep people unwell and keep people down without the ability to thrive, they have lost their humanity. And so one, it's like I want to encourage us to keep on to our humanity in this fight. And I think, and that's how we keep fighting for, justice and humanity and laws that reflect that. More specifically, I think when we fight for policies and when we advocate for certain policies, we want to do that with the knowledge of we're aiming to remove barriers and promote more equitable environments and systems that serve us. So we want holistic education, right? We want culturally appropriate education and an education system that does not contribute to the erasure of large groups of people and the experience of large groups of people. We want full voting suffrage for Pacifica people who have made the U.S. their home. And I'm talking too about COFA Islanders, and when I say COFA, I'm meaning Compacted Free Association. These are any of our Micronesian folks, our Mauritius folks, our Palauan folks, the folks that have come to the U.S. and made the U.S. their home, whether it's due to displacement, or otherwise, but the people that are working here, living here legally, paying their taxes, and don't have the ability to vote, and in that way give their voice to what impacts them every single day. I'm also talking about U.S. nationals who have made the U.S. their home and have fought in the U.S. military and have died in the U.S. military who do not have the right to vote. I'm talking about food solutions. Food is both the center of our health and our unhealth. And so how do we promote food solutions and funding for, community-oriented solutions? We know what we need. I think Adriana was saying this. We know what we need as a community. We know it's healthy for us. And how do systems support that? How do policies support that? Housing is a really big one. We need more affordable housing. We need housing solutions that don't break our families apart. And I could go on and on. Our immigration system, our policing system, healthcare. These are all things that determine our health. How do we promote policies that are inclusive of Pacifica peoples? And what we have to self-determine is health and thriving for us. So I'm going to leave it there for now.
I'll jump in. I love everything that you brought up, Kiana. So I'll just add on to it. I think some of the very important pieces that we can do as we're working towards addressing systemic racism and bias is also to equip and involve our youth. That is kind of like the very important piece about doing this work is that we're not doing it only by ourselves, but we're also involving our elders so we can learn about things that have been done in the past, but also equip our youth so they can be ready to push this work even further when it's our time to take a step back and have the new generation take up the mantle. I think those are so important thing, and that's kind of like what I love our youth work, especially with our MANA group, because it's a way that we can pass on our knowledge, but also equip them with some of our culture that we have, so that they continue to be informed about how they're going to push this work, but also to make sure that we're in solidarity with other communities, that by uplifting or by mitigating some of the systems that we're working doesn't create barriers for the Asian American community, doesn't create barriers for Black community and some of those work. I think those are the very important things that when we're doing this, where it's like we're doing it collectively as a community and even with other communities with how we're fighting moving forward.
Yeah, and I think I love that, and I love, right, like we value our kupuna, our elders so much. they are literally walking libraries, right? And they're not they're not going to be around forever, right? So we need to soak that in as much as we can and continue to pass it along. And that is the tradition of our people since time immemorial, right? Like, you know, we Hawaiians weren't a written language people. Like, we passed it on through our stories, through our dance, through our chants, through our hula. You know, that's how we have these things. And then Western society sort of comes in and it's like, oh yeah, there's water there. And we'd be like, yeah, well, we've been chanting about water being there forever. So you're welcome, you know, like, welcome to the party. You know, but joking aside, I think that, you know, recognizing that there's some folks in our lahui that want to move away from the Pai'aina, they want to live on the continent, and that's totally cool, right? And then there's a segment of our lahui that is just been priced out of here, right? That our spaces are also very finite. We come from islands, you know, and when people, back to what Adriana was saying about, I think a lot of times we've been romanticized, right? And so this idea of moving to paradise, right, like, will displace someone, right? And even if you are not physically moving them off of the island, your presence, right, it might drive up the prices of land and being able to live in that specific area, and then people are leaving, right? You know, just to like shout out the latest winner of American Idol, Ian Tongi, right? Like, also shared that, right? Like, they moved to Seattle because they were priced out from Kahuku, which is on this island, right? And so how are we also supporting that, back to what Kiana was saying about like around housing and that being such a big thing, especially for us island folks, right? That we are on this island. How are we establishing sustainable food sources? You know, Hawaii is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and we have great weather. We can get 4 crop cycles, right? If we're looking at it through that lens. And how are we shipping in so much food, right? And how are we not prioritizing our foods, our aipuna, our mea'ai, like, so that our young people can also understand what ulu tastes like, right? And be ono and crave ulu, be ono and crave kalo over the French fry, right? Like, why are we not having these things? And I know, like, those are sort of like two pieces, but, you know, just also, again, just to go back to sort of that romanticizing our people, right? Like, I would say if you are not from Pacifica communities and you're coming to us, whether moving or whether for a training or whether for something else, and it's on the premise of, oh, it's so exotic or it's so like beautiful and lovely, I would question why you're coming to us for that, right? Like, let's dig a little bit deeper on maybe why you want to make Hawaii your home. And I would also argue, if you are making Hawaii your home, then you're also signing up for the kuleana of taking care of this land as well. You can't just come here and move and not malama this aina, right? And not malama the ocean as well. Like, you have a responsibility now to learn the culture, learn the people, and shepherd this land just like everybody else, right? Because that is our kuleana as a lahui. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Amazing. I love this. I love the importance of how we are so, you know, the land, the people, the body, the mind, the soul. And there's and we were just talking about the importance of taking care of both because they are not separate, they are one. And something popped into my head. There's an island in Fiji, Makongai, where after they eat fish, they take the fish bones and then they put it back into the ocean because it's our ancestral belief that they'll come back and we'll fish them, and that's the way that, you know, our ancestors believe the food cycle, that's how it is. And really amazing. Reggie.
It's hard to follow up what y'all just shared because it, like, coming from, like, I'm not a Pacifica person, right? So I have to be like hella versed in at least 100 plus other cultures multiple languages, multiple things. When I think about that challenge, most people turn away from it. Um, people get overwhelmed, whatever. But when we're trying to do like anti-racism work and trainings, I think about the very core of that is healing justice, and that is across all of us. And so when we get this data, we get this information, I hope that we're looking at it with a lens of being able to make some critical interventions. Like what could that look like, right? With some of the data that we're pulling out, what we're learning is that the education system as it currently exists is one that continues to colonize people. And so that's why we have a charter school movement and we have a Hawaiian language school movement happening on the islands. Another way that I think about anti-racism and the role of data is that it's never neutral. And so the way that you report out on your data, how you talk about the people, are you blaming the disparities on the people, or are you going to be pointing towards the systems that failed them, right? You could colonize people through the stories that they shared with you for their own generosity. Like that's really messed up to me. So it, like not much to add to you all, but it's just a very strong reminder for folks that when we do this data, it's in the end of the day to do healing justice work for our neighbors.
And I love this, and I just want to share a few points. Well, that's the amazing thing about being the facilitator. I also get to, you know, um, make a few points, but also just recently today, um, this thing about colonization, it comes in different packages, it comes in different forms, and it's this thing around white savior. And just today, the governor of Papua New Guinea um, signed a defense agreement contract with the U.S. government, just because they felt like, oh, the Chinese government is coming into the Pacific, or we need to be the first one, to get in there, sign some agreements, say that we'll provide, trainings for their military force, and it's all these things that are so connected to one, like militarism, taking over the Pacific region. And Papua New Guinea sits on one of the biggest um, resources in the Pacific region that is untouched. And I'm thinking like, oh, sign the agreement, sign this new agreement, the so-called save Papua New Guinea from the Chinese government, but you are going to start infiltrating and start taking resources from the Pacific region to benefit, and you're gonna uplift and put resources into their military force because they feel like they have the weakest military in the Pacific region. Wow, what a priority! And this becomes so problematic in the Pacific region. Leaders, our Pacific leaders continue to just take money from bigger countries because America, China, Korea are the savers of our resources. And I would say that recently, 2 weeks ago, no, well, a week ago, the new Fijian government had brought back the Great Council of Chiefs, which is an indigenous body that looks after indigenous people. And this is such an historical moment because the past government had taken it away because they didn't believe in indigenous people having their own, kind of decision making process. But to me, as an indigenous person to Fiji, as an Itoke, it's important to have um, our chiefs to take up the role to make decisions on what's better for indigenous people in Fiji. Okay, enough of that. And now to really come back into our conversation around, policies, influencing policies, anti-racism, racism. How do we address that in policies and education? And what can you do as an individual, to promote desegregation of AA and NHPI data to ensure that, the unique needs and experiences of communities are accurately reflected in policies and programs that you all do? Should I say who's the brave one now?
Here, I'll go first. I think if just looking at this question, I want to approach it from a lens of a community member person and what I can do outside of my role here at Utopia One. I think the first thing that comes in mind is conversation, and that conversation can even start at home. Even at church or even small groups I'm also a part of, to where I can talk about the importance of disaggregation and what does that mean for our community when data is being disaggregated, when resource allocation is where it needs to be, to where we highlight some of the health disparities that our NHPI communities face. I think that is something like I would do. I would do as a community person is really having those conversations.
Amazing.
Now, coming into my role, oh, sorry, I forgot the second part of that question, so I'll jump right into it. Now, with my role as with Utopia as our policy director, I think we what I would do is just to ensure that our community's voices are being heard inside all of these spaces, and we are also at the heart as we're building out what the system will look like. I think that is something that I'm very passionate about, especially when having these conversations with policymakers. It's ensuring that the needs of our community is being reflected on what's being put out, and it's also being addressed.
Amazing.
I'll turn it over to Kaika.
Excuse me. I have to.
Have some water, darling.
I know. Excuse me. I mean, I think, yeah, having that conversation is really important. I think, and going back to something I said earlier, I think being that nagging voice that keeps asking for the disaggregated data. I do think that we need to create that demand. I think we need to put people on the spot in a way to continue to answer that with why they don't want to disaggregate the data and make that uncomfortable, because that's the status quo right now, right? Is that they don't want to disaggregate the data because of this, that, and the other, right? And we need to make that not comfortable so that it forces all of us to disaggregate the data, because then we know that that's where the work is, right? And then we can all be doing it together, right? And so it might start like a conversation. Actually, hearing Adriana talk, actually my mind started wandering to sort of like, well, I wonder in those conversations, if everybody themselves is like a community researcher, if we all put that little hat on, right, then when you're at your family reunion and you're hearing people talk story and talk amongst themselves, and you're hearing kind of some themes, like maybe bring that to your next conversation when you're talking with someone who's really interested in data, right? Like, wow, a lot of my cousins are really like, for whatever reason, I just realized that a lot of them are diagnosed with like diabetes. Like, yeah, that's true, because our communities have higher rates of diabetes than other communities, right? But that's an example. But if there are other themes that kind of also pop up, I would like bubble that up, right? I think for me and the work that I'm doing around in Papolo Lokahi, I think it's really looking at not only the disaggregated data that we do have, and I'm fortunate enough that in Hawaii, the Department of Health actually does disaggregate the data a little bit more than other places. But also, like, we know that a lot of Kanaka live in diaspora. So how are we also serving them, and how are we also ensuring that their needs are met, right? And how they're engaging with various systems. So I think the fight around data disaggregation, even on the continent, is very much a Hawaiian issue, as well as it is everyone else's issue too, right? So continuing to push it in that way. I will kick it to Reggie.
Oh, awesome. I have like a personal strategy that I use. Oop, is this better? Okay, so I have a personal strategy that I use because I don't know, maybe because I'm cute and small and I'm 4'11", and then people are like, oh, this person is like such a high, cute voice. Like they underestimate me. And I think that is a factor that like Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders sometimes face is being underestimated by, like, say, our political or institutional opponents. So when people do something like, say, this grand API stereotype to me, I actually have in my pocket like immediate follow-up questions. So when they say like, oh, APIs are the model minority, I'm like, who are you talking about? Can you please describe which specific groups you are talking about? And then being able to already have in my back pocket, did you know one of the lowest educational equity factors that we have are people who are coming from a refugee background? So talking and disaggregating in our own conversation, like don't let them get away with lumping people together. Like even in our daily conversations, we can actually pause and be like, are you actually talking about all of them? Which specific ones? Are you only talking about East Asian folks? Are you only talking about second generation, third generation folks? Are you talking about folks who were raised in the United States? Or are you talking about international folks? So that's completely different, right? I think having people stop and interrogate, like, actually, I don't know everything. And I am woefully kind of lumping everyone together in a way that is unhelpful for anyone. I think that is one of the ways that we can start getting into a culture of asking to disaggregate as well, is saying, actually, you don't know this entire group. Can you name for me the 100 groups in this umbrella? And then when they count, it's just like, oh, okay, so you're not actually aware. Let's go ahead and start breaking down the data now.
Yeah.
I love all of these answers, and I love the personal strategy and the professional strategy. I think so. I like what Ikaika said about the discomfort and making things uncomfortable. And I want to lift that up and also say something else that popped up in my mind from hearing that, which is that oftentimes when I'm talking to community members about this issue, they already have recognized that there is discomfort in the aggregate. Like when somebody asks them to do something for API month, it feels uncomfortable because they see themselves lined up next to people who are not them or not coming from where they are from. But they also have this like deep need for either the visibility or the want to show up on behalf of our people. And so I think, in talking about discomfort, it's, one thing, hold systems accountable and what they say they're going to do. I cannot name a system right now that does not have equity somewhere or diversity somewhere in their strategies and policies. Hold them accountable to that. And so, ask the hard questions and make sure that we can make it uncomfortable. But on the other end, I think it's important for community members to know. And I was actually asked this last week by one of my community members, Kiana, what do I say when, I'm going to my child's dance tonight and they are organized, it's an API Heritage Month performance. And I felt so uncomfortable and I didn't know what to say because they're having all of the Pacifica kids dance for it. And I want it to be a good time for them, but I don't know what to say. And I think it's like choosing the right moment is important. So it's probably not very helpful if you're headed to your child's dance to say something, right before it starts. But also recognize that you are entitled to say something when the time is right, whether it is right for you or for them or whatever it is. Know that, I know that we are very humble people and we're also very respectful and we want to be respectful. But if they made you uncomfortable, know that you have the right to make them uncomfortable right back. And if that discomfort comes in the form of harm to you or your community, make sure they know that they're doing that so they don't do it again. And I think that there's a respectful way to do that. But I also just want to encourage community members to feel their right to stand up for themselves in that moment because they are uncomfortable. So that's one thing I want to say. We are right at the end. This is the last day of this Heritage Month, which honestly is way too busy always. And that's because there's always so many asks and so much performative measures and tokenizing during this month. Please, everybody, I'm like, I need systems, I need institutions, I need organizations and schools to reach out outside of May and want to engage with our communities outside of May because we're around all year long. And so I think, and, when I get asks in the month of May, I always let them know that it's super busy and that I'm happy to engage all year long with them, any other time of the year, and not ever at the cost of another community's visibility, as we've talked about. So I think there are a lot of strategies, at a micro level. I think there's more like advocating for oneself and one's community, like in interactions that are harmful. And I think at more of the systems level, it's, analyzing like where you and your family are not fitting in, and like where you and your family are experiencing poor health outcomes or discomfort operating within systems, like, schools not engaging with you in a culturally appropriate way. There are so many ways I think that we can advocate both at the micro level and at the system level, whether you're in a professional role and being paid to do this, or whether you're just a community member that is being made uncomfortable by someone. So I think it's like, just always know that you fit in, that you belong. Like, our community belongs right where we are. And we are absolutely like worthy. We are enough. We are resilient. And we absolutely are entitled to advocate for ourselves and all of that. And I think there's a role that each of us play. But again, I'm really grateful for the time and space to collectivize together today and to analyze all of this. And to everybody that has tuned in, I'm grateful for that too. And I hope that we can just keep taking this forward and keep, adding to the building blocks that so many people have already been building up for us in past decades and years.
Thank you. And I think just to add on, uncomfortable conversations are very important, because if we're sitting down in a conversation and it's sitting perfectly, then I guess we're not understanding the issue. If it's uncomfortable and it's boiling something in you, then I guess that's a conversation that we need to have. And I guess it's this kind of conversation that makes things uncomfortable, that sparks movement, and it builds on conversation, and it makes us want to do, more. Even I would say, me leaving Mozilla, Montana after the Pacific Village Initiative, I am boiled about, like moving this amazing work forward. And of course, we can't do it with communities and our funnels and our people together, to move this work forward. And I want to thank all of you wonderful and amazing panelists for your brilliance, for your manner, and Reggie, girl, I know that at Creating Change this year, people saw this little queer looking person standing up, about to open up the session at Creating Change. But girl, you brought the house down, and we had wonderful conversations that were also uncomfortable, and that we're able to then keep moving these wonderful conversations, even till now. And in conclusion, as we wrap this Talanoa on beyond desegregation, it is really evident that desegregation is a valuable tool for understanding the complex systems, by breaking down the smaller parts, the little pieces of cake. However, it is, equally important to recognize that true progress lies in the moving beyond desegregation and what that means. Without, do any of you folks have any last words to share? Yes.
I think just gratitude to all of you panelists, like Amasai said, for all of your work and all of your mana, and Utopia Washington for your incredible work and for bringing us together. So grateful always to you all.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Ikeka. Thank you, Kiana. And thank you, of course, my director, Adriana, for joining us in this amazing conversation. And thank you to our amazing viewers for tuning in, for learning about desegregation and why it's important in this work. And thank you to everyone that's been part of this amazing conversation in Talanoa. Again, uh, Vinaka Vakalevu, Fafutai Lava, and mahalo to all of you. Vinaka.
Mahalo.
Ara, that was a great conversation.
A great Talanoa and conversation indeed.
Yes. We'd like to thank our panelists for taking time to have this important conversation and for sharing their brilliance with us.
A special thank you to you, our viewers, for tuning in. We thank you for your support. We hope to see you at our next Talanoa.
Manuia.